All right. With me, we've got August Turak, who is the author of, if you can see it, Not Less Than Everything. It is a very impactful read. Um, it's very humbling to be able to talk to the man that wrote it and live these stories out. Um, the As I read the book, the thing that just slapped me in the face, there's one, and I'm gonna paraphrase it. It was something like, if we lived our lives like a prayer, maybe they'd be answered. And I had to put the book down when I read that.
Yeah. I think the actual quote is from Richard Rose, right? It
Mm-hmm.
isn't the prayer you say, it's the prayer you live.
Mm-hmm.
And if you live, he said, I asked him, Mr. Rose, what do you think about prayer? He said, make your whole life a prayer and it'll be answered instantly. You got to live the prayer. You don't say it. It's not about just saying the prayer. And that is the real theme of the book. And a friend of mine who was actually a student, Bob Sergel, who was actually a student of Rose's back in 1972, 73, when I was, um, he put it in he wrote me a blurb for the book. And uh, Turak talks about what's the essential ingredient to any spiritual path: commitment. It's commitment. It's the same thing in anything in life. If you want to be great at anything, you have to be committed. You got to put it on the line. There's got to be something, I always say that um, maximum performance comes out of equal numbers of inspiration and desperation.
Mm-hmm.
Inspiration's not enough. You also need a back against the wall mentality. You mentioned Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, my other book, before we went on. And I mentioned in that book that when we started our own company, we started on $2,500. And we decided that was just enough money. We didn't have a business model. We were smart guys. We're going to figure out something to do. So that was what my partner said. Our business plan is we're smart guys. We'll figure out something to do. So that very first month, we put $2,500 into the business. We said, that's all the money we're ever going to put in this business. That was enough for 1 month's rent, 1 month's phones, pencils and papers.
Mm-hmm.
If we can't figure out something to do in this first month to raise another $2,500 so we can pay for the second month, we're closing shop.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Dave and I both had money, we could have just kept feeding the snake. But
Mm-hmm.
no, you put your back against the wall and you got to go all in. And to me, that is the secret to success in anything, and especially in your spiritual life. I mentioned this the other day, Eric, to someone where I said, I'm tired of talking to people about religion who just rattle off things they believe.
Mm-hmm.
Belief, Rose says belief in 50 cents will get you a cup of coffee where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, what sacrifices are you making for your religion? What inconveniences do you go through? How much trouble is it costing you? How are you living it out? Well, if I asked you, if I followed you around yesterday, how many things would I see you do that would make me think, wow, this guy's a religious or a spiritual guy? You know, um, or are you just like everybody else? But then if somebody pins you down, you rattle off a bunch of beliefs. You know, belief is cheap. Action is dear.
Couldn't agree more. I tell people all the time, like, don't I don't want to hear positive sounding affirmations if you're not going to act on your words. Um, I couldn't agree more. I mean,
Right.
you have to walk in the direction you say you want to go towards. And if you don't, that's cognitive dissonance. You don't
Yeah.
truly believe what you claim, and those are the things that we should.
And that's what we try to paper over with rationalization to cover up those cognitive dissonances.
Absolutely.
And that's what a good teacher does. A good teacher or mentor exposes you to your cognitive dissonances and won't let you run away from your cognitive. And that's what Richard Rose was constantly doing to me, showing me how you know, what I was saying and how I was living. And a lot of times it becomes what in Christianity they talk about the witnessing.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times if you're just hanging around, um, my old my first literary agent said, "Oh, you scare people." And the woman who I have a nonprofit corporation, and all the proceeds from my books, my lectures, my workshops, I donate everything to charity. I don't take any money for what I do. So I put it in this nonprofit that we created, and there's a woman named Melissa who runs it, and she says what she says, August F. Turak, you're a force of nature. You don't have any understanding how hard it is just to be around you. And that's the way, I remember Sigmund Freud said of the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, he said, in my youth, he represented a nobleness of mind I could never hope to achieve. And when you're around somebody like Richard Rose or Brother John
Mm-hmm.
or Father Francis, people, Father Christian, the people I mentioned in my book, Bill Richards, Lou
Mm-hmm.
Mobley, these people end up acting as a mirror, exposing your own inadequacies to you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't tell the story in my book, but it's Brother John, who is the one of the heroes in the book, is a monk at a Trappist monastery outside of Charleston, South Carolina. I wrote an essay. My writing career started when I wrote an essay called Brother John that won the $100,000 Templeton Prize, and actually is now a book called Brother John, A Monk, a Pilgrim, and the Purpose of Life. And it's about Brother John and how he taught me the purpose of life. But he's a very, very sweet, mild mannered, very kind, generous person, just a lovely guy. So I'm down at the monastery and I'm staying there for a few months. And as what they call a monastic guest. So I'm living with the monks behind the cloister wall, which means I get up at 3 o'clock in the morning with them. I go to church 8 times a day and do the liturgy of the hours, they call it. I work with them in their monastic businesses like eggs and mushrooms and stuff. So one morning, and you go to bed at 8 o'clock at night and you get up at 3 in the morning. And one morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, I didn't get up. I slept through the alarm and I slept through vigils, which is at 3:20 in the morning. And all of a sudden at 4 o'clock in the morning, there's this knock on my door. Knock, knock, knock. And I jump out of my bed. And I rush to the door and I open it. And there's Brother John. And Brother John says, Augie, are you sick? We were worried about you because you weren't in church. Choir, they call it. You weren't in choir. I said, no, brother John. I just slept. I just overslept. He said, oh, okay. Don't worry about it. That's all right. Good, good. He walks away. I've never forgotten that, Eric, because Brother John could not imagine anybody sleeping through it. If you weren't in choir at 3 o'clock in the morning, you must be on your deathbed.
Yeah.
And I felt so inadequate, like such a piker, like such a slacker.
Yeah.
You get around great people. You got to have the courage and the audacity to be around these people because they're constantly exposing you to your own inadequacies. You're trying to measure up to them and failing and trying to measure up to them. But then you have to go back and start and try again. And you also have to fight against, when I was around Richard Rose, thank God I was self-aware enough to realize it was happening and laugh at myself when I saw it. I caught myself, here I am, his student, dedicating my life to help him helping me find cosmic consciousness or enlightenment or whatever. And I'm fine. I catch myself secretly hoping that I'll catch him with his hand in the cookie jar. I would love to catch this SOB doing something terrible.
That's games people play.
Why? Then I said to myself, why do you feel that way? And then I said, of course, if you could catch him with his hand in the cookie jar, you could say, ha, he's no better than me. I'm off the hook. He has no moral superiority over me anymore. I'm off the hook. And this is why we're always trying to tear heroes down.
So we can
because
justify our own inadequacy.
exactly. So
Yeah.
you only have two choices. You can either decide to be as, and this happened at Duke University to me, as a matter of fact. I was working with college students over there and doing spiritual coaching and on a volunteer basis. I talk a lot about the self-knowledge symposium in my book.
Mm-hmm.
And Dean Williman, who was the dean of the Duke Chapel, was my mentor over there. He was my faculty advisor. And he asked me to come to his office and have a meeting. And he said, you know where I was last night, Augie? I said, no. He said, I was at uh, a faculty meeting. I said, oh. He said, you know what the subject of the meeting was? I said, no. He said, you. I said, why? Well, he said, you have no idea how, and I'm going to say this out loud anyway. You have no idea how far your ass is hanging out. He said, there are a lot of people, the ministers in the interfaith council ministry, all these different chaplains and people who are failing to inspire kids. And their excuse for it is that the kids are, you know, not interested. They're slacking off. He said, you're making liars out of all of them. Your kids are on fire. And so they have two ways of looking at it. Either A, they can say, he said, one guy out of 100 is going to say, hey, let me go talk to this guy Turak and figure out how his formula, maybe I can do it too. He said the other 99 are going to say he must be feeding them the Kool-Aid.
But
He's
I
up
don't
to no
think
good.
there's a formula though. I think like you talk about throughout the text, um, it's that journey of self-discovery that leads you down the path you're supposed to walk. And when people see you walking your path, they can smell it and they want to be around it because so many people are so fake.
There's no, it's kind of what it reminds me of is um, Socrates. Socrates said, you can't, there's no formula for teaching virtue. Now, the word virtue, by the way, is a misnomer kind of because the Greek word he was using was arete, and arete means excellence of character, greatness of soul.
Mm.
He said, I can't teach that. He said, but I can midwife it. In other words, I can kind of coach it.
Yeah.
And you can't just, you want to play golf, no one can hand you a book and then you read the book and then you go out and all of a sudden you can play golf. But a golf coach can help you to develop. Leadership is a lot the same. There are limitations, for example, and some people are just not gifted genetically or whatever you want to call it. They've got so many strikes against them that all the king's horses and all the king's men are not going to make a leader out of them.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, there's a tremendous number of people who are working at helping people to become leaders, and some of them are successful or they wouldn't be able to be doing it. Lou Mobley was one of them. You mentioned him,
Mm-hmm.
the IBM executive. So
Mm-hmm.
there's no formula for reaching young people, but there is a lot of things you could still learn. One of the things, and you pointed it out, one of the things that um, a youth ministry person actually cornered me when I was studying theology at St. John's in 2002, and I was working on a master's degree in theology, and this woman approached me and said, uh, I'm in charge of youth ministry, and and I'm not doing very well. We're not, and I heard that you're doing great. Your kids are galvanized." So we had lunch, and she said, "What's the secret?" And I said, "The secret is that it's authenticity." I said, I don't have this artificial separation between me and the kids where I'm the teacher and they're the students, where, you know, we have this line between us. I said, I answer any question my life is an open book. Anything they want to know. If I want them to be honest with themselves and honest with me, I have to demonstrate that by going first and being that with me. I said, and I'll be honest with you. It's terrifying. I said, I realized that as what am I really doing every week? I'm getting, and I was doing it all on a volunteer basis. These kids weren't getting credit. I couldn't flunk them. It was all whether they were going to come back next week or not was all based on what they experienced this week. And I realized that what was I doing? I was getting up in front of these kids and I was saying, if you live the kind of life that I've lived and I'm asking you to suggesting that you should live, when you get to be my age, you're going to be just like me. And when half of them don't come back, they're fundamentally voting with their feet saying, I don't like the product here. I don't want to be like you. You know, so I'm exposing my soul and saying, hey, how do you like me so far? What do you think of the end product here? And I said, what I liked about this as part of my spiritual path is that it kept me honest. If I was tempted to do something that I shouldn't do, one of the things that kept me from doing was I'm going to have to get up in front of these kids next week. How am I going to look them in the eye if I'm not, so they held me accountable. And so we ended up leaving at lunch and we got about halfway. She was going to the library. I was going to the gym and she started to cry. And she said, you're making me wonder just exactly how authentic I really am.
Oof.
And I said to her, I forget her name, but I said, listen, that's one of the most authentic things anybody's ever said to me. That took a lot of courage for you to open up and be that honest with yourself. That's the first step to being with authenticity. I said, so take heart, don't, be down on yourself. But still, Eric, the rest of that semester, that woman avoided me like the plague.
She felt exposed.
Exactly. We'd go to parties and stuff, they had all this stuff. She'd get as far away from me as she could. She scared herself to death that she opened herself up that much to me. She showed too much vulnerability. And, but that's the secret. You've got to believe, you've got to be, your own motivations have got to be authentic so that you can open yourself up to people and and allow them to see who you really are and be willing to face the fact that some of them might puke their guts at what they see.
Mm.
I remember I gave a speech at North Carolina State University. One of the speeches that kicked off the Self-Knowledge Symposium was a speech I came up with called 5 Years with a Zen Master. It was a lot of these Richard Rose, crazy hillbilly, West Virginia Zen Master stories that are in my book, Not Less Than Everything, that we're talking about here. And I must have spoken to, and I was put through there, it was the University Scholars Program. And it was a very, very successful lecture. So I did it like 5 times, each time to 300 students at a time. And I asked for surveys and I got survey results. Every time I did a lecture, I passed survey around because I wanted surveys. I don't remember a single survey except one. The comment of this one kid said, yeah, right. Whatever trips your trigger. All I got to say is I got better things to do with my life than sit here listening to some burnout old hippie tell me stories he made up. I still remember that review. 99% of them were positive, but I remember that one.
Yeah, there's a term.
You got to put yourself in play.
Yeah.
Open yourself up to the possibility of getting eviscerated. And most people are just not willing to pay the price.
So the thing that has hit me hard in both books is one, in this text you get into more detail, I feel like, when you're talking about the injury and how
You're talking about the skydiving injury?
Yeah, I mean, you sustained a pretty serious injury, and it shook you to your core. And during this recovery process, someone that you led ends up leading you, and leads you further down your path. A student.
Who's that?
When you got when you learned about Mebkin Abbey from,
Oh,
and it helped you kind of feel fired up again.
well, well, first of all, Mepkin Abbey helped me tremendously. There's no question. The guy's, by the way, the name of the student. We're talking about a student at Duke. His name was Josh.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and after I broke my ankle in this skydiving incident, I embarked on a 2-year dark night of the soul. And and I just started spiraling downward. I was having panic attacks in the hospital, and then horrible, horrible depression. Why? Because I was confronting my mortality for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
and the terror of death. It had stripped away all the buffers that we usually use, and it felt like somebody was holding my head under a bucket of water.
Mm.
And there was not a darn thing I could do about it. And even after the panic went away finally, then the depression was just horrible. Um, and everything was dark. And I mentioned there a guy at a gym. I'm rehabbing at the gym with doing stair climbers for my ankle. I compound fractured the tibia and the fibula in my ankle. And this guy who I hardly knew, named Hugh, who worked in a furniture factory, walked up to me while he said, "You're not feeling too good, are you?" I had a real strong Southern North Carolina accent. He said, "You ain't feeling too good, are you, Augie?" That's all I knew. Hi, you. Hi, Augie. That's all we knew of each other. And I said, and I just shook my head. And he said, "Yeah, feels like your heart's broken, don't it?"
Mm.
And I thought, "Oh my God, that's exactly how it feels." But I never had the words for it before. So I just nodded at him, and he said, "Yeah, I'm here to tell you that we call it the soul hole." That's what he said to me. He said, "I'm here to tell you that you're going to, in for 2 years is so much hell, you're going to be wishing you was never born. But you're going to get through it. God's going to be waiting on the other side. And you're going to love yourself a whole hell of a lot more than you do right now." And he turned around without waiting for me to say a word and walked out of the gym. And I'd seen that man at the gym every day for 2 years, and I never seen him to this day again.
Mm.
So how did he know all that? Who was he? I don't know. But I was spiraling downward. Not too long afterwards, I get a telephone call from one of my students at Duke, Josh, saying he's spending the summer at Mepkin Abbey Monastery as a monastic guest. So I suddenly just spurted out. He was telling me about what he was doing and going to church 8 times a day, getting up at 3 in the morning, living with the monks. And I just spurted out. I said, "I want to come." And he said, "When?" And I said, "Now." And then I said, "No, well, I'm at work on Friday night." He said, "Let me go ask Brother John." It's the first time I ever heard Brother John's name. Brother John ran the monastic guest program back then. And he came back on. He said, Brother John said, "Come on down," which was amazing because usually I have a long waiting list, and they must have really liked Josh a lot. They did. They liked Josh a lot. So I ended up going down. But it wasn't the monastery that they they helped me tremendously. And there's a lot of stories in my book about interactions and helping me to grasp. But what happens at the very towards the end of the book, the two pillars, as everything was collapsing, I got down to two pillars. Every time things would get really, really bad, I'd rush off to Mepkin Abbey, and it would bolster me up. But at the end, the last time I go there in December of 1998, December of 97, it didn't work. And then the other bolster was the girl, Meredith, the girl from Duke University, who I was so close to. And then in January of 1998, she walked out, left the group, and left me.
Mm.
So I didn't have Mepkin anymore, and so my spiral, there was nothing. The floor just fell out of everything.
Mm.
So Mepkin was my spiritual experience to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Takes place in Baltimore with Bill Richards, that had nothing to do with the monastery.
Mm-hmm.
So the monastery, quote unquote, didn't fix me, but it was an extraordinarily valuable experience, which I think was essential to the overall process. But this is one of the things that people find. Where you were talking before we went on about the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, based on my experience and everything I've read, this dark night of the soul is not optional. This is this is when the ego, and the reason it becomes so dark is because when your ego starts, this is I said the purpose of every life is to become selfless. In
Mm-hmm.
Business Secrets of the Trappist Monk, I said that, well, it starts with my book, my essay that won the $100,000 Templeton Prize. Selflessness is the purpose of life, to be transformed into a selfless person. Most people think of that in the more mundane idea of being nice, giving away your money or being charitable, and it is, that's one. But the ultimate form of selflessness is when St. Paul talks about, the Greek word is kenosis, which means selflessness. And in the hymn, in St. Paul's famous hymn, he said, Jesus, I'm paraphrasing here, Jesus, even though he was God, didn't take on the trappings of God. Instead, he became a human, became a servant, and 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 stripped himself down, even to death on a cross. He died, and that's emptied himself. That's the word, emptied.
Mm-hmm.
Kenos, he emptied himself to really find the ultimate mystical experience, which is the subtitle of my book is One Man's Quest for Enlightenment. And in the Christian tradition, it's called the Unio Mystico, the union with God. You know, it's what Job talks about at the end. I've heard you with my ears, but now that I've seen you with my eyes, I know that I am dust.
Mm.
And it's no fun to get to that point, ladies and gentlemen,
Mm.
because in the back of your mind is the sense that maybe I'm only dust. And God isn't going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. I'm going to go to zero and just be zero. I'm just going to die. So when the ego must die. For this self-emptying to happen, the ego must die. Everything you think of as yourself, your selfishness, it has to die. And when that starts to happen, the body mistakenly thinks that it's dying. And so your instinct to survive, your survival instinct kicks in, and you fight like hell. And you can no more decide not to fight than you can decide not to panic if somebody's holding your head underwater. You're gonna panic. I think of that waterboarding, that torture that they used. Everybody, the people doing it and somebody undergoing the waterboarding, knows that it's not fatal. You can't die from waterboarding. It doesn't help. When you're being waterboarded, you go crazy. I said somewhere in my book, I think, oh no, I don't think it was in my book. I said, people throw around this word surrender. I mean, I wish, if I was a murderous kind of person, I'd start shooting people talking about surrender. They have no idea what they're talking about. You can no more consciously surrender than you can kill yourself by holding your breath. You cannot kill yourself by holding your breath. You cannot consciously surrender. Surrender is something that happens to you. When you're, as Rose says, when you're completely fought out, trying to accomplish the most noble task there is. So when the ego starts to die, this was what the dark night takes place. You know, I was reading a book about humility. And I use those T.S. Eliot quotes in my book. And he
Mm-hmm.
says, one of them, T.S. Eliot says, there is only humility, and humility is endless. The process of finding God is a process of ever deeper and more humility. But as this psychiatrist I was reading about, this religious psychiatry, he was writing about religion, but he happened to be a psychiatrist. He said, but what everybody forgets is there is no true humility without humiliation. And let me tell you, I don't think I have to tell you, there is nothing more painful than humiliation. And to be completely, and you saw at the end of my book where I finally throw my arms around Bill Richards and I said, I'm so ashamed. I'm just so ashamed.
Mhm.
St. John of the Cross, one of the greatest, if not one of the great mystics, if not in some people's mind, the greatest. Um, he wrote a book called The Ascent of Mount Carmel. It's the steps and stages of a mystical Christian mystical path. And he says the last step in the process is the hardest. And he said the last step is when you become so aware of your own fragility and human weakness and sinfulness that you fear that even God couldn't save you. And so this is the stripping process that you go through. All of your vanity, all of your little games. Remember in my book when I asked the psychologist from here in Raleigh, his name is David Kravitz. I don't use his last name in the book. His name is Kravitz. And I said to him, I said, David, why does this spiritual journey have to be so hard? And he just very casually said, because we insist on playing our silly games until the pain becomes so great we can't take it anymore. And this opens up another whole can of worms, because if this is true, and I know it to be true, then the job of the teacher is not to reassure us necessarily, but to increase the pain point, is to hold that mirror up till so that we can, so the pain becomes so great that we can't take it anymore. This is the whole Alcoholics Anonymous thing, right? He's got to get so sick and tired of being a drunk and all the lies he's been telling himself, all the lies he's been telling everybody else about why he drinks or doesn't drink, or all the little games he plays about hiding booze and sticking it under pillows and pretending he only drinks beer, whatever. He probably had to do the geography cure a couple of times where he moves to some other city thinking that'll help him stop drinking. He's got to get sick of all those games to the point where he just stands in front of God and says, if you don't save me, I'm done. And that's what the whole Alcoholics Anonymous thing is about. Surrendering yourself totally, saying, hey, this is bigger than me. I can't possibly do it. And a spiritual path is when you can really finally get to that life itself is bigger than me, Lord. And what is being asked, feels so much like death that, in my opinion, no person really makes this great leap into God's arms utterly. Now we're talking about commitment again. What did Jesus say? He said, you must love the Lord thy God with thy whole heart and thy whole soul and thy whole mind and thy whole strength. What else could he say, for God's sake? You got to be all in with no, remember what St. Augustine said, Lord, make me celibate, but not yet. We play this game with God. I'll do anything you want me to do. Just don't tell me I can't get you're going to take my children away from me. You're going to take my marriage away from me, or you're going to take my job away from me, or tell me I got to live in New York City, or I can't leave New York. No, everything's got to be on the table. Everything's on the table, even your very life, even your very sanity. Because if you're not all in, then you're playing this game, negotiating. It kind of reminds me of the guy that goes to the psychiatrist, guy that goes to the psychiatrist, and he says, oh my God, my whole life is a disaster. I'm a total, I'm so depressed. I'm so anxious. I've got, nothing works anymore. Doctor, I'll do anything you ask me to do. Just don't bring up my mother. Well, the doctor knows right away the first thing he should bring up is his mother. Whatever it is we're trying to take off the table is exactly the thing that needs to be on the table. And the reason why I was so hard on myself in that book is I could never bring myself to put everything on the table. I was always holding onto the world with one hand while reaching for heaven with the other hand. I always needed a fallback position. If God doesn't want me, or there is no God, or Then what? Then I have to have a fallback position. But I knew in my heart that God was saying, I'm just waiting here for you to finally get so sick and tired, you're going to give up all those fallback positions. I want you utterly, I want you completely with no hold, no reservation, no holding back. And you got to trust me that I won't drop you. And so I always say that nobody, there's a famous photograph of that guy, that horrific photograph of the guy that jumped off the World Trade Center when it was on fire during the 9/11 disaster. So you say to yourself, why did he jump off the top of the? Because whatever was behind him was even worse. His current situation on top of the World Trade Center was untenable because it was flames. So his choice was either to die in fire or jump off the thing.
Hmm.
We never make this leap until our current situation becomes untenable. And it usually takes a long time because what we keep trying to do is making minor adjustments. We're like the golfer who's got a lot invested in his golf swing, but it's not working. But he thinks if I could just a little bit of it, maybe just one lesson, 2 lessons, maybe if I just change my grip, maybe if I just kind of, and the pro is sitting there saying, no, we got to tear this sucker down and build it back up again. And then he said, well, if I go all in like that and I do that, can you guarantee me that when we get back that I'll be a better golfer? No, I can't guarantee you. You may end up being a worse golfer. Because in order to take a step forward, you got to take a step backwards. And the danger is that step backwards becomes permanent. You're shooting 85 as a golfer. You tear down your golf swing. Now you can't break 100. And you never get back to 85 again. So we want an evolutionary approach to spirituality. We want an approach where we never go backwards. We always just get a little better, a little holier, and a little holier, and holier and holier somehow, until finally God gets so impressed with us that he calls us on the phone. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it's not a competition.
You actually got to go. It's a process of going backwards, of surrendering, of giving up, of letting go of these games and these things that you play with, and taking the risks. I mean, that was, and I knew the risks. I knew that I could probably give up marriage and any chance of success in business and all of life's so-called pleasures that other people go for, and end up living in the main hotel. That was one of the themes of the book, is that main hotel down at Carnegie that I introduced in the beginning was a place where old bachelors go to die, renting rooms at $150 a week or what it was back then. What guarantee did I have that if I threw my whole life into this search for God, I just wouldn't end up living in the main hotel, watching The Price is Right all day long? There is no guarantee.
And going through, like like we said, the hero's journey that you went through, this very painful process. There's a part in the text you talk about when you're going through all this turmoil, you almost want to not show up to teach and work with the kids, because you start having this thought of like, well, if I do it once, how many times will I continue to not show up?
And then what? Yeah, what I was talking about is Richard Rose said that the most important thing is you have to be committed. You have to be getting back to your hero's journey. Let's quickly delineate the hero's journey. The hero's journey comes from Joseph Campbell. He didn't invent it. He just noticed that in all storytelling, in all cultures for thousands of years, this motif of the hero's journey is repeated again and again and again, which he said that reveals that this must be something very fundamental to human spirituality or human psychology. So the first, I compressed it. His, he's called it Heroes with a Thousand Faces or something.
Mhm.
It's the name of his book. I compressed it down. I said the first stage is the call. This is what we call in religious life the vocation. You get called, and Moses gets called to by the burning bush. In the movies, it's usually some telephone call or something summoning Clint Eastwood to come back into the Air Force because only he can fly this new plane, and only this new plane can stop the terrorists.
Mhm.
And then the second stage of the hero's journey is always the resistance to the call. So Moses tells the burning bush, "No, I'm not the right guy. Send my brother Aaron." And Clint Eastwood always said, "You okay? I wouldn't come back to you, baby, so and so is the way you treated me when I was." So that's the resistance to the call. And then the third stage is the hero accepts the call, and he goes into the desert. And the desert is, in the Christian tradition, we would call it formation. This is when you're trained. And I think, unfortunately, in most Christian thing, it's educational now. It's something you learn in a class. You get formed in a classroom. No, formation is Marine boot camp. That's true formation. And so in all these movies, in the Bible, of course, Moses has to go out into the desert. Jesus goes out into the desert, and literally in the movies, you always have some Yoda screaming, "Don't try, do." Yeah, in my book, it's Richard Rose screaming at me. And in the Matrix, it's Morpheus beating the hell out of Neo. And in in the Karate Kid, it's wipe on, wipe off, wipe on, wipe off, whatever the heck he keeps telling the kid.
Yeah.
And so whatever it is, you can guarantee in every movie, the teacher is going to make create a living hell for the student. That's the desert. And then the next stage is that he comes out of the desert. And now he's got a lot of power because he's been trained. He's a warrior now. When he comes out, now he's tempted. Is he going to use it for good, or is he going to use it for selfish reasons? And this is the essential tension of both the Bible and in the movie. Jesus is tempted as soon as he comes out of the desert, right? The devil says to him, he tempts him. And what does he tempt him with? Power. He says he'll give him all the power in the world. So he can go to the dark side. In the Star Wars, it's Darth Vader. He listens to the devil and he goes to the dark side and he becomes the devil. Michael Corleone in The Godfathers, he takes all the power and he goes to the dark side. So the tension is, we want to know, how's this going to play out? What's Jesus going to say to the devil when he offers him all this power, etc.? Then the next stage is the death and rebirth. So the hero, of the one that takes the goods, he has to die and be reborn. And it's done the best, in my opinion, in The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, because Neo now has all this power and he's a force for good, but he comes up against the devil, which is Agent Smith, and he can't beat the devil all by himself because he can't do it on his own power. No matter how powerful he is, selfishly, individualistically, he can't do it. So Agent Smith kills him. But he's connected by a phone line from the Matrix, which is Earth, basically, back to heaven outside the Matrix to the woman who loves him, who happens to be named Trinity. And Trinity loves him, and so she represents, in the biblical tradition, would be Sophia, wisdom, or the Virgin Mary, or whatever. And her phone line is the connection between heaven and earth. And she sends down her love through the phone line, which is grace. And he comes back to life. And now when he comes back to life, he's no longer relying just on his own personal power. He's relying on God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Ghost. Trinity. And now he whips the poop out of Agent Smith. because he's got God working on his side. And then the last stage of the hero's journey is the return to help other. The hero comes back now that he has conquered life himself. His job is to come back and help other people. So, getting back to your comment, in my book, things got really, really bad. And I was, got to the point where I was fundamentally having a nervous breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened on Valentine's Day of all days. And I had a class that night and I was in no shape. And I also had found out that the kids in my class were against me. There was a lot of unhappiness. And so I reached for the phone to cancel the class because this girl, Meredith, who I previously mentioned, was my TA for the class. And I was going to call her and cancel the class for that night. And I had the phone in my hand and I said, wait a second. I can cancel this class tonight. What am I going to do if I don't feel better next week? There's no indication I'm going to feel any better. Cancel that class. And then what? Cancel the course. And then what? Cancel my life.
Mm-hmm.
What am I going to do? Take up pool? After all these years of being on a spiritual path, I'm just going to chuck it all and become a chess grandmaster or something? Start playing, giving tennis lessons?
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly it hit me like a ton of bricks. You are committed. A million decisions that you made over the last 25 years have brought you to this point. The only way for you is forward. You have to go no matter what. And I knew I was going to break down in front of these kids, but when I went and I was sure they were going to call 911 or bring in the campus cops or report me to the administration or just be horrified by what they saw, because I knew I was going to collapse in front of them. And instead, we had one of the most miraculous, when I finished, my ability to go first and tell about everything I was going through, it was like the Holy Ghost came in and like tongues of fire. Every one of those college students had some agony in their life, the alcoholism of their parents or the death of a parent or the divorce or something. And they all talked about it. And they were all, and like my brother said one time, we're all in so much pain. And my going first, and the magic filled the air. You could feel the Holy Ghost and the Holy Spirit in the room. And it was all because I went ahead, because I was committed. The very next day, one of the guys that was a former student of mine who had just graduated, now he's working for my company. He was auditing that course. His name was George. And he worked for my company. And the next day, he wrote me an email in the company. And he said, Augie, he said, I have never seen, I couldn't even imagine a human being lowering their shields as low as you lowered your shields last night. Show as much vulnerability as you showed. He said, where did you get the courage to do that? And I wrote back and I said, George, courage had absolutely nothing to do with it. I had no choice. He later told me that when he got my email, he was so affected by it that he went into our men's room of our company and laid on the floor and cried and wept, And I used the analogy several times in the book. If you want to, this is why in getting back to the hero's journey, I've said in Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks, where I illustrate all this stuff. Everybody wants to think the desert stage is optional. They want to think they can skip over the desert stage, the training, the hardcore training, the sacrifices you have to make. It's like somebody thinking they can become the heavyweight champion of the world without learning how to box. There is no substitute. And I said, you must become like a soldier that is so highly trained that his legs keep on moving long after his heart and head have given up. That whole last section of my book is me moving forward with no hope, you know. There was a wonderful book that I read called The Ego and the Dynamic Ground. It's by a psychologist named Michael Washburn that talks a lot of, when I don't know if it had helped me if I'd have read it before, but I read it afterwards and it was like, oh my God, this is everything. It's like the guy was taking notes while I was going through all this. And at one point he says, despair is a wonderful thing. It is so painful and so unremitting that it's just about the only thing that will force the ego to admit to its nothingness and sinfulness. And, you know, so, all of this stuff that I went through, is and if you go back and you look at the lives of the quote unquote saints and the great people, and it doesn't even matter. Look at anything. Look at the life of a super successful entrepreneur. Look at the life of a super successful athlete or something like that. It's a life of people that are willing to make the sacrifices in order to have some, however you want to define greatness. And you have to be willing to, I knew a guy who was fought on the martial arts circuit in the Far East, and he went to see it. He wanted to go into this. It's an amazing story, but anyway, he wanted to be the greatest martial arts guy of all time. So he was only 17 years old, and they offered him the opportunity, but he needed a trainer and everything. He'd been already 10 years he started when he was only 8 or 9 years old. By the time he was 17, he was good enough that these Chinese guys offered him an opportunity to go out and compete in China, So he needed to go and find himself a trainer. And he went and found this guy. He went up to him and he said, his name was Bosco. That doesn't matter. But he went to Bosco and he said, I want you to be my trainer. And he said, no, I can't. No. He kept going back. The guy's name, the fighter's name was Jeff. Jeff kept going to Bosco, please. So finally Bosco looked at him and he said, all right, if you can answer 2 questions affirmatively, I will be your teacher. He said, first question, are you willing to pay the price? Second question, will you pay the price? And Jeff said, I'm willing to pay the price and I will pay the price. And he said, okay, I'm your teacher. This is, we get seduced into all kinds of spiritual, I would call it nonsense, that is another form of eat everything you want and still lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's this prosperity gospel nonsense or whatever the heck. And Richard Rose, the teacher that's in the first part of my book, he was very, very controversial. And there was a lot of reasons why he could be very controversial. But when I finally really, really looked at it hard, I said, you know what the reason he was so controversial? He had a very simple phrase. He said, spiritually speaking, he said, results are proportional to energy applied. As above, so below. There's an old mystical phrase, as above, so below. The macrocosm is recapitulated in the microcosm. And it's kind of like God created us in his own image and likeness. We're like a reflection of him. And the same, what made him so controversial was the same laws that apply to building a business apply to spirituality. He said, all men want the truth. The only difference is, do they realize it? How much energy are they willing to put into it? And how efficiently do they apply that energy? It's like all men want to get rich. Do they realize it? How much energy they're willing to put into the quest? And how efficiently do they run their business? And that simple thing terrified people. And the more I looked at it, I said, wait, the reason is most people gravitate to spirituality to escape the horrors of life. In other words, to escape the dog eat dog, where the people that work the hardest succeed and the people that were willing to make the sacrifices where, all those kind of things. I want a place where grace does it all. I don't have to be held accountable. Everywhere in my life, I'm being held accountable. And I'm always failing and I'm never measuring up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very, very painful to live that way. So I want to find a community of spiritual people to say, we're not going to hold you accountable anymore. Nobody's going to hold you accountable. God loves you just the way you are. You don't have to change at all.
Yeah.
Everything is fine. Everything is good. Relax, go with the flow. Just say your little mantra or say your little prayer. And, everything. And by the way, I'm never going to call you on your BS if you never call me on my BS. And we're all going to go along to get along, and we're all going to sing Kumbaya, and everything is beautiful in its own way. And that's what people want. Where the laws of nature that are so hard to deal with in the most of life no longer apply. Somehow magic now takes over, grace. And we don't have to worry about effort doesn't matter anymore. Accountability doesn't matter anymore. Personal responsibility doesn't matter anymore. And here comes a guy like Rose and saying, no, 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 no. That's BS. Spirituality is super accountability, super responsibility. I'll tell you a quick story. I had when I first started my group here in Raleigh, there was like 20 or 25 people that would gather at my house every Friday night. And we would have, we started kicking in $5 a head each week to cover, community expenses, and incidental expenses. And so I said, listen, I don't want to be touching that money. So I want a treasurer. Somebody's got to volunteer to be the treasurer. And this guy, Kenny, came up to me after the meeting. He says, I will volunteer to be the treasurer. He said, on one condition. I only have one condition. I said, what is that, Kenny? He said, if somebody shows up and they don't have their $5, I don't want to ban them at the door. He said, I'll keep a running tab. And if somebody ends up leaving the group and they leave, I'll make it up out of my own pocket. And I said, that's extremely noble of you, but you can't be the treasurer. He said, why? He said, I thought we were a brotherhood. I thought we were about spirituality and being a higher values and higher purpose and about compassion. He said, we're not a movie theater. I said, you're absolutely right. We're not a movie theater. We're 1,000 times better than a movie theater. And if you wouldn't imagine going to a movie theater without your $5, why would you come to something about God without your $5? I said, yes, we're all about compassion. The compassion is from all of us to you as the treasurer to make your job as easy as possible because you've been nice enough to volunteer to take on this responsibility. The compassion flows from us to the community, not from the community to the individuals. We're here to make the community work better. We're held ourselves accountable to make your job as easy as possible. So no, we're not a movie theater. We're better than a movie theater. We hold ourselves to higher standards than the movie theater does, not lower standards. And I remember he had this look of, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. And he became our treasurer. And he did a really good job. And once it became really, really clear that if you showed up without your $5, you didn't get in, we never had the issue. Nobody ever showed up without their $5. Nobody ever got turned away. I said, what? I said, by the way, if it really turns out it's a hard case where somebody just doesn't have the $5, as long as they didn't spend it on their $5 on beer, I said, then we can do something for that person. But to say that just somebody forgot their wallet, that is not acceptable. And to me, remember what Mr. Rose said about communities. He said, too many communities and to becoming a mutually modulated conspiracy of mediocrity, hiding behind some rubric about acceptance and compassion. No. He said, we're not talking about this community we're talking about putting together ain't no coffee clatch. It's no book of the month club. We're talking about an Everest climb here. You know? And that's the way I feel about spirituality and about spirit. This is deadly serious stuff. This is the most serious thing there is in the world. You know, if you take it from a Christian perspective, we're talking about our immortal souls here. The word I learned in graduate school is soteriology, soteriological. It means things that have a bearing on whether we're going to be saved or not. This is not, this is not the, this is not for triviality. But so this is, so yeah, I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of people listening to this podcast, Eric, who are going to say, man, this guy, this ain't for me. This is, this is, this is too much. And yeah, and I think some people are going to have that reaction to the book too. As a matter of fact, I know I've already heard from several people that they have had that reaction. A very close friend of mine, actually was a friend of mine from prep school, a Hotchkiss school that I mentioned earlier in the book, read the book and got in touch with me. And he said, he wrote a very, very moving email to me. He said, I was very, very troubled by your thing. He said, I can't stop thinking about that book. He said, but I have to say, Augie, he said, I could have never done that. I'm a weak person. I could have never done that, and it was very moving, in a way. He wasn't a weak person because it took a lot of strength for him to write what he wrote. But, I think especially every man, and I remember the story of the Vietnam vet in the very beginning of the book who gets terribly wounded in Vietnam and experiences all these horrors, but all he wants to do is get back to Vietnam. Because he said when he was in Vietnam, he was alive. Everything was simplified. There was no time for nonsense. There was no time for bull crap. There was no time for phoniness. There was no time for putting on airs. Everything was about staying alive and helping your buddies. He said, and there was only that one white hot source of that single source of white hot center called life. And I was there, man. I was living it. I was one of them. And he says, and now I came back here. He said, and everything's in slow motion and everybody's dead already and they don't even realize it. And then he waved his beer at the room and he said, this is nothing but phony cardboard bullcrap. Ordinary life, the way most people live. It's kind of like that old thing it's not true, I understand, but we were little kids. We were told we only use 12% of our brains. Well, I don't know whether we only use 12% of our brains, but the vast majority of people are barely doing 12% of what they're capable of what life really, of what they could do with their lives, And I became fascinated that what would it be like to go all in, to find something so remarkable, something so beautiful, something so pure, something so good that I could go all in for it without any reservation. There's a story from Business Secrets of the Trappist Monks that I would like to have repeated in this book, but I just didn't have the space for it. And I don't remember if you call it, but Father Christian comes in to see me down at the monastery, and he's carrying a book on physics, subatomic physics. Yeah. And he's a 90-year-old guy. And I said, what are you doing with that? And he said, well,
brush it up.
He said, yeah. He said, what did he say? It's time to bone up. That's what he said. Yeah. time for me to bone up on subatomic. He's working himself through a subatomic physics textbook at 90 years old to bone up on and um and then he starts making a critique of uh of most spiritual books, you know. But anyway, I eventually worked up the courage to ask him why he became a Trappist monk. They keep silence. He likes to talk. He's extremely intellectual. He's got 3 PhDs. And he said to me, he said, I made a mistake. And he starts laughing like a hyena, you know, I made a mistake. And I waited for him to calm down. And he said, I was very happy as a Franciscan. I was teaching in seminary. He was a college professor and he loved it. He just loved it. But then he said he went on a tour of a Trappist monastery. And while he was taking that tour, he said, I made the mistake of asking myself a question. I said, Father, what was the question? He said, what would it feel like to give myself totally to God? And the hair just stood up on the back of my neck and tears came into my eyes. And I said, I think I know what you mean, Father. But I said in business, although I fear that I never would, someone who has truly experienced God, as opposed to the difference between somebody who's truly experienced God and somebody who he said the difference is infinite. I almost thought of calling this book The Infinite Difference. The Infinite Difference. And it's like even when I was a little kid, if you ever look at the paintings on the I've been to the Sistine Chapel and saw the paintings on the ceiling, and the one where God is reaching out to Adam, and Adam is reaching out to God, and their fingers are about to touch. And when God's touching, and you know that when God's finger finally touches Adam, he's going to come to life, and you know all. And there's only about 1/4 of an inch separating God's finger from Adam's finger. And when I was even a little kid, I said, oh my God, what is it going to be like for Adam when his finger touches God's finger? My God. It's like Mr. Rose said about his spiritual experience. And he said, I've spent 30 years trying to understand what happened to me, put words to it. He said, I'm no closer now than I was then. He said, the totality. My God, the totality. And when you hear somebody say something like that, or you read something like that, you're either a nut like me and say, I gotta know what he's talking about. I gotta experience what he's experienced. Everything else is just phony cardboard bullcrap. And that's the way I felt. I had to get to the bottom of life. I had to really peel back all the layers, get behind all the crap, and find out what is really, really, really going on. Anyway, I'm just blabbing on and on. I hope I'm making some sense anyway.
Yeah, I just those why questions are what drive us sometimes. I mean, it's curiosity, I don't think killed the cat. I think it made the cat smarter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, and I often wonder, I mean, I even said on Facebook a few years ago, I can forgive you almost any sin except for a lack of curiosity. I said I had a friend visiting here, you know, as a very religious person. I said, you know, I don't understand why the questions that are so obvious to me, no, most people never even ask. I said, for example, I said in the gospel, John the Baptist meets Jesus. And he says, behold the Lamb of God, behold him who takes away the sins of the world. And then there's a voice from heaven that says, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And then, next thing you know, John the Baptist is in prison, fearing that he's going to die. And he calls one of his disciples and he says, go to Jesus and ask him, are you the one? Wait a second. You just told everybody, behold the Lamb of God that told to take away the sins of the world. You heard a voice from heaven say, this is the beloved Son in whom I'm well pleased. And now you're sending one of your disciples to ask him if he's the one? Doesn't it? Aren't you curious about that?
Yeah. If you
You
already
know,
know, why are you still afraid?
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, of course, I asked one of the monks down there that question, and he said, because he's a human being. No matter how much, evidence you have, when the crunch time comes, your faith gets tried, your faith gets tested. But I mean, there's a million things, there's a million questions that people just aren't curious about. They doesn't, they go to church every Sunday. I think about my dad. My dad was a very devout Christian, a Catholic in his own way, and he never missed church. And even during Lent, we would go every morning at 7 a.m. We'd go to mass. And all the years that I knew my dad and went to church with my dad, not once did my dad ever come out and get in the car and say, that gospel today was really interesting. And you have noticed that never, it never stirred up a single thought in his mind, you know.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know. I think people that are wired to seek truth will always ask unpopular questions, and they're not always going to be welcome people in the world.
Right, of course.
And the thing you touch on earlier, where you're talking about how you were saying that they say you scare people sometimes, but it's like when if you're not afraid to uh, throw yourself under the bus to prove a point, I mean, why would you be afraid to ask a hard question to somebody else? And
Well, what we're all afraid of, I like to look at the English language. And the English language, the way we use the English language in normal ways can tell you a lot about our psychology. I mentioned in Business Secrets of Trappist Monks, the word self-conscious is always negative. So when you're self-conscious, you can't get out of your own way, you can't give a speech, you're bashful, you're shy, you're self-conscious. So there's a lot that can be said about. So why is this self-consciousness selfish? Why is it something we don't like? But the other one is the word disillusionment. Disillusionment literally means nothing more than to lose one's illusions. Yet, if you and I started a school, Eric, where we promise bring your kids to our school, and Eric and I will disillusion them. Nobody is going to send their kids to our school.
right.
What does this tell you about human nature? It tells us that deep down inside, we're all terrified that if we were stripped of all of our illusions, there'd be nothing left. And what I find that what most people are afraid of about questions and curiosity is once you start pulling on the thread of the sweater, the whole sweater is going to unravel.
Yeah.
I actually went through this in my own life because I thought when I was in college, I had doubts and I had confusion. And the more questions I asked, I started asking questions in order to clear up the confusion. And the more questions I asked, the more confused I got. Later, I came up with a way of saying it. I said, spirituality is a journey into confusion propelled by an abhorrence for confusion. Because the more confused you get, the more uncomfortable you get. And the more uncomfortable you get, the harder you think. And the harder you think, the more confused you get. So it becomes a spiral, a spiral. But,
Oh,
but the ultimate confusion is a tremendous place to be because when you no longer know what's going on, you no longer know what to defense.
there is a heavy metal band that I've been obsessed with for my whole life. It's a band called Tool. The lead singer is Manny James Keenan, and they have a song that talks about the spiral, and they say in the lyrics, it's reaching up and reaching out, reaching for the unknown, spiral out, keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to listen to that before I was going to track practice. or before going to the gym to train for Highland Games or track and field, throwing the hammer, because everything we did was rotational. And I just used that as a mantra to go
Yeah.
blank. But as I got older and got more curious and read more, asked more questions, and like you're saying, kind of started letting go of those little lies about self, then I started asking deeper questions and weeding out
Well,
people.
I mean, and the danger, of course, of what we're afraid of is what I say in my book. I said, I said after I got out of the hospital when I broke my ankle, I said, I found myself on a journey into the unknown without a map, without a guide, without a single familiar landmark. And then I said, like a long-suffering patient without a diagnosis, my prognosis could be just about anything. That's true journey in the unknown. I mean, truly unknown. You know, and I wrote an article for Forbes called "The Dark Side of Leadership." It was called, but I was really talking about spirituality. And I used a quote from Apocalypse Now, the movie Apocalypse Now, where they're going up the river to find this guy Kirks and assassinate him, basically. But they get the assassin, played by Martin Sheen, and his chef get off the boat to go look for mangoes, and they run into a tiger, and the tiger chases them back to the boat. And the chef goes crazy. He starts stripping off his clothes, screaming, "Never get out of the boat! I'll never get out of the boat again! I'll never, never, never get out of the boat! Never get out of the boat! Never get out of the boat!" And Martin Sheen's cool, calmly sitting over there smoking a cigarette, and you can hear his voiceover in his head. He says, "Never get out of the boat. Never get out of the boat. Damn right, never get out of the boat unless you intend to take it all the way." And I wrote later, I said, there's a certain time, if you want to be great, there's a certain time when you got to get out of the boat and you head off into the jungle looking for some, whatever it is you're looking for. And at some point in time, you're going to have this sick feeling hit you that whatever you're looking for may not be there. It may not be, you may not be good enough for it. But whatever, there's no way for you to go back to the boat. You've forgotten how to go back to normality. You've forgotten to go back to people that care most about, what happened on Andy Griffith last night.
That's
And even if you could get back to the boat, you could never get back into the boat. In other words, you've turned yourself into a mutant. You've turned yourself into somebody who's vibrating on a different string. And it's a very, very scary place to find yourself to be. It's an extremely lonely kind of place to be. And a lot of times, especially in leadership, like when I was the CEO of my own company, nobody knew that I wasn't even getting paid. And nobody knew that I was terrified that I wouldn't even be able to find next week's payroll because I had to stay cool, calm, and collected, never give away, never let people know I was scared. And meanwhile, everybody thought I had it made. All he does is sit up there in that fat office telling people what to do. He's got it made in the shade, and you got to let him think that. And so that's only on a leadership basis. But when you're really doing it on a spiritual path, that's like so many people, about 5 or 6 or 8 people have read my book who thought they knew me really, really well. And said, I got Augie. I knew you all during those years. I was at MTV with you. I never knew any of this. I never knew what you were going through. I never knew. Because on the outside, I was always a happy-go-lucky guy with a lot of friends and always had a girlfriend and whatever I wanted, I could get. Nobody knew what I was going through. And so that adds to the stranger in a strange land functionality of it. But you have to be willing to go there. You got to get out of the boat at some point. And when you get out of the boat, the one thing I can guarantee you is there are no guarantees. I say to people all the time, there's a difference between an adventure and uh, just a thrill. A thrill is when you get on a roller coaster because it mimics a death-defying fear, whatever thing, but you really deep in your heart know you're safe. A true adventure has to have authentic risk involved. There has to be risk. And the higher the risk, the more authentic the adventure.
And when you talk about like you say, you get out of the boat, you go into the jungle, like you go after whatever that thing is. Um, do you realize where you're at each of those phases
No,
in
no.
retrospect?
In retrospect, yeah. Remember at the end of Business Secrets of Trappist Monks, I said, the problem with life is it must be lived forward and only understood backwards.
Mm.
You can see certain things when you look back. Yeah, I can see things that I see by looking backwards. But at the time, if you got everything in a place, a place for everything and everything in its place, then you've got control. What you're being constantly asked by God to do is surrender control. You're being asked to give up control and let Him take control. But you negotiate. If I give up control, what's it going to be like? What am I going to get? Well, how long do I have to give up control? What are you going to do with the control? What are you going to ask me to do? How do I know I'm going to be happy with it? And so we play the game. We just keep negotiating, but God doesn't negotiate. Remember in Matrix, Morpheus plays the role of God, and he looks at Neo and he says, I promise you the truth, nothing else. He said, if you take the blue pill, you go right back to where you were. You'll wake up in your bed and you'll forget you haven't met me. He says, if you take the red pill, you're going to find just how deep this rabbit hole goes. But I promise you nothing but the truth. Nothing but the truth. And that's what you got to want, the truth for the truth's sake. And I said, it's not that hard. People have a hard time relating to that idea. I said, it's not that hard. I used to do this with my college students. Remember, I did it one time at North Carolina State University. I said, imagine a movie. I said, where this guy's got it made in the shade. He's the young superstar politician on his way up. The mayor is his mentor, his father figure, because they were both cops. Him and his dad. His dad died as a cop when he was young, and he was a hero. The dad was a hero, and his partner was the guy that's the mayor now, and the mayor has taken him under his wing, and he's been his father figure all of his life, and now he's married to the mayor's daughter, and they have 3 lovely kids, and they have a big house, and he's being groomed to be the mayor himself, and then governor, and then God only knows, maybe president of the United States, and everything's going great, and then one day he stumbles on a little piece of information that suggests that the story about his father's heroic death in the line of duty may not be the whole story. So he starts to dig, and he starts to dig because he wants, and then as soon as he starts to dig, stuff starts happening. Stuff starts disappearing. People start telling him to get out of here. Then he keeps digging. And so now the warnings start coming. Stop, and then I said, so his life starts getting more difficult. And I said to my college students, so what do we want him to do? And this girl yells, we want him to keep going. I said, so he does keep digging. Of course he keeps digging. And then the mayor finally calls him in and says, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Your dad is a hero. Your dad is an absolute god around here. All you can find out is things that are going to bring him down, not anything that can make him higher. He can't go any higher. All you can do is bring him down. Why would you keep digging on all this stuff? But he has to know, so he keeps digging anyway. And the next thing you know, threats are happening. He gets beat up. He loses his job. His wife leaves him because she's under threats, and she thinks the kids are going to be put in harm's way by his obsession with getting to the truth about his dad. And I said, okay, what do we want him to do? And the same girl yells, we want him to keep going. How many movies have been done like that, Eric? How many stories have been done? The hero starts with everything going his way. He gets obsessed with uncovering the truth, some truth that can no possibly help him in any. It's not going to make him rich, not going to make him famous. He just has to know, and his life starts to come apart. And there was that movie with Kevin Bacon where turned out there was bodies in the backyard, and ghosts started talking to him, and he started listening to them, and blah 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 blah. And his wife left him, and his friends left him, and his job left him, but he kept going and going. This is hero. This is what we mean by the heroic. And when we watch it on TV, we want we want the hero to keep going despite all the suffering, despite all what it's costing him. But then in our own lives, we don't want to pay those prices. We'd rather go to the movies and watch other people do it.
Yeah. And we want a vicarious reality, not our
We
truth.
want a vicarious reality. Exactly.
Yeah.